Hello, Facebook. Hello, Instagram. Hello, YouTube. Marcus here. I'm going to talk about salmon today. Wild salmon, farm salmon, Atlantic salmon. So, people, there's a misunderstanding about wild and Atlantic salmon, and especially among chefs. Chefs and restaurant owners sometimes are really confused about this. And I've spoken to some very well-known chefs that just have no idea about what they're serving. They really just are kind of clueless when it comes to food sustainability, to the effects of farm salmon versus wild salmon, or the differences of it, or really what farm salmon actually is. So, and this is really a misunderstood thing here. The word Atlantic salmon. The word Atlantic salmon is basically describes a species of salmon. There are 5 or 6 species of West Coast salmon: king or Chinook, sockeye, soho, chum, silver. So there's several different. There's about 5 or 6 species of Pacific salmon, and Atlantic salmon. There's one species. It's Atlantic salmon. That's what it's called. Now, Atlantic salmon do exist in the wild. There definitely is wild Atlantic salmon in the ocean, in the Atlantic Ocean. This comes from Canada all the way over to Norway. However, and by the way, salmon is a species that is native to the northern hemisphere, not to the southern hemisphere. So you will not find a wild salmon. You will not find wild salmon in the southern hemisphere. That just doesn't exist, no matter if it's Atlantic or Pacific. They've tried to stock salmon in the southern hemisphere, in I believe Australia and New Zealand. I don't think it was quite that successful. So when I talk about the word Atlantic salmon, we're talking about the species and the origin of the salmon, where it's from. Two things. So most chefs, when they see, and most consumers, by the way, but there's a lot of chefs that as soon as they hear the word Atlantic salmon, they assume that the salmon is wild in their restaurant and on the plates and what they're serving. And I just wanted to let you know that is not the case. That is the farthest thing from the reality of what Atlantic salmon is when it makes it onto your plate. Atlantic salmon, when you see the word Atlantic salmon, whether I'm a chef and I'm looking for it in a distributor, or I see it in ShopRite or Hannaford's or wherever I see it, or on a menu, we're talking about farmed salmon. Now, Atlantic, like I said, there are salmon in the Atlantic Ocean. There definitely are salmon in the Atlantic Ocean. There's so little wild Atlantic salmon that it's not available for commercial. You can go sport catch fish here and there. In Scotland, you can definitely go catch certain wild Atlantic salmon, but the prices are exorbitant. We're literally talking, I spoke last year or the year before to one of the main seafood vendors in Scotland, who that year, actually, when this was 2 summers ago, when I spoke to him, he had literally gotten like 4 wild Atlantic salmon. And I had a great conversation with him. And he goes, Marcus, it's just one of those things where we have it, but it's not available. It's one of those things where investment bankers pay about 10,000 euro to go on a salmon expedition. And the salmon that they're catching are salmon that are spent. And I'll talk about what spent salmon are. So salmon is an amazing species. Salmon will spawn. They will swim around the ocean thousands of miles, and then they will come back to that exact spot where they were born and lay their eggs and die. So they'll come back to that exact same spot. Now what happens, once salmon start that spawning process, once they start swimming up the stream, they stop eating. So that's why the highest quality salmon are caught at the mouth of the river, in the ocean or the mouth of the river. As soon as the salmon starts journeying up the river, it stops eating. And of course, the salmon go back to the exact spot. So they're programmed in. This is why Pacific salmon, river run salmon, are amazing, because whether you're having from the Yukon, which is 2,300 miles long, or the Copper River, which is 300 miles long, the salmon is programmed ahead of time to store that much fat for that journey, whether it's 1,000 miles or 100 miles. That's why Yukon River has some of the most prized salmon in the world. The longest river, the salmon builds on the most fat content. So salmon, once they hit the mouth of the river, they stop eating, and they start swimming up the stream, and they start eating their fat reserves. That's what keeps them alive. And at that point, once a salmon gets up to the spot where they spawn, of course, salmon die. So the salmon is at the end of their life. Well, sport fishermen in Scotland will literally pay 10,000 euro to sit there and catch what's called spent salmon that are basically getting ready to die. The salmon are dying anyway. It's not like they're getting salmon that before they spawned and things like that, before they lay their eggs. These salmon are history anyway, but they pay a lot of money to do this. Now, when I spoke to the distributor 2 years ago in Scotland, he's like, Marcus, they basically call the wild Atlantic salmon season for like a couple hours a night here and there. He goes, there was literally like 4 or 5 nights all summer long where they called the season where you can go out and actually fish. He goes, everything is monitored as it swims up the stream, just like the Pacific and Alaska. Everything's monitored very closely. And when they feel they have enough fish up there, they will actually call season. He goes, but there's so little fish. And he explained to me that wild Atlantic salmon, true wild Atlantic salmon in Scotland was running about €100 a kilo. That's 50 euro a pound, which he goes, Marcus, wild salmon in Scotland, when it's caught, is reserved for royalty. He goes, Michelin 3-star restaurants barely even get this stuff. It is that's how expensive this stuff is. So, folks, when you hear the word Atlantic salmon on a menu in a store, we're 99.89999% talking about salmon that is traditionally farm raised in open pens. This is farm salmon, folks. It's farmed out in the ocean. And if you ask chefs, like this is the interesting part. You can go on to Yelp right now, type in New York City as a location, and type in quote unquote wild Atlantic salmon. And you will find 100 restaurants that say they have on their menu, maybe even more restaurants, wild Atlantic salmon. There is no such thing as wild Atlantic salmon coming in on menus. It is so expensive. It is so very rare. Even the best fishmonger, the best seafood distributor in Scotland can barely get this product. It is reserved for royalty. So don't let a chef tell you that. And I've had a conversation with Alex Garcinelli. She's the one who is involved in the Michelin star restaurant Butter and the one who is on Food Network. I've had a conversation with her because she swore up and down that her Atlantic salmon was wild. And I had to explain to her that it wasn't. Also, the lady Maria Loy from the Greek restaurant in New York City, she was another one I had a conversation with that swore up and down that her Atlantic salmon was different than everybody else's and it was wild. And that's not the case with what they're serving. Folks, when you see the word Atlantic salmon, red flag automatically goes up and it means farm raised without a doubt. So, got some comments coming in on Facebook and on Instagram too. David goes, I feel really vulnerable knowing I had garbage fish. There are a lot of people that, and I just had this conversation with a friend the other day, a matter of fact. She was, well, this is wild Atlantic salmon. Or I said, no, it's not wild Atlantic salmon. It's farm raised Atlantic salmon. All of a sudden it was like silence. Folks, Atlantic salmon, the word Atlantic salmon automatically means farm raised. Faroe Island salmon, Norwegian salmon. If you hear the term Norwegian salmon, it is farm raised salmon. If you hear the term Bay of Fundy salmon, that is Canadian salmon, that is farm raised. If you hear the term Faroe Island, a lot of chefs are on Faroe Island salmon. They think Faroe Island, which is this isolated place north of Scotland, makes this really great farmed salmon. It is farmed salmon. It is farmed the same exact way that all the other salmon is farmed out in the ocean. And here's what some of the Faroe Islands does a great job with this. Their marketing, if you go onto their website, the Faroe Islands Association, they show these beautiful mountains and saying our salmon is ocean raised, but it's ocean raised in pens. And some of these places, some of these producers will actually say raised in the wild. Our farm raised salmon is raised in the wild. Okay, when it says that is another trigger for it is farmed salmon. Anything, folks, from the Atlantic Ocean, from Canada to Norway, is farmed. None of it, there's not enough that exists to go around commercially. Again, you can sport fish. You can go up into Canada, the St. Lawrence, you can go up in the place like that, and you can sport fish at certain times of the year and get a salmon here and there. But for a restaurant to buy true wild Atlantic salmon, that does not exist for us here. I have a question from David. Where can I buy real salmon? The best place to buy real salmon, right now, wild salmon is not in season, so you have to buy frozen salmon in the wintertime. You can go to a company called Vital Choice, Vital, Vital Choice. If you go to our website, there might be a link to it somewhere. I know in our emails we provide a link. If you call the market, or you go on the market that's in Seattle, the really famous fish market, Pike Place, there might be some distributors there that actually will ship out to you some frozen wild salmon, or when it's in season, some fresh wild salmon. Now, the wild salmon season in the Pacific Ocean does not open until April, May. June and July is when it really starts hitting, and they have a ton of fish because the fish have, again, already swam up the stream, because they have to monitor and count how many fish migrate up the stream to actually lay their eggs, do their thing, and hatch to where it becomes a sustainable resource or a plentiful resource where they can start fishing more quantities of it. And that season will roll until about September, October, maybe November. And it's on a quota system. You could probably get some wild ocean caught troll king salmon in the middle of the winter time from Alaska, but it is very, 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 very pricey. If Pike Place doesn't bring it in, nobody is bringing it in. That's just the reality of it. So that's a true test. If you want to know if wild salmon's in season, go to Pike Place Market, go to their website, and see who's selling. Now, one of the key words that'll be on the Pike Place, I've seen this website many times. I've looked at it many times. One of the key things is it'll say refreshed. If it says refreshed or previously frozen, you know it's not in season because it's been frozen. Jamie just dropped the link. Jamie, where'd you drop that link on?
I'm gonna get it on there right now.
Jamie's gonna drop a link for Vital Choice. Vital Choice is where we bought our salmon from before we opened the restaurant, before we had Aroma Time prior to 2003. When we bought wild salmon at home, we would go on and buy Vital Choice salmon. So Jamie's going to drop that link for Vital Choice on Facebook.
Yeah, I'll drop it on.
Oh, and she'll go on Instagram too. So right there, Jamie just dropped that vitalchoice.com link right there on Facebook. They do the cool thing. Yes, David, Jamie's going to drop it on Instagram as well. She just joined. There she went. The Vital Choice link is there. The cool thing about Vital Choice is you can buy seafood packages from there where they send you seafood every month. And you actually, folks, you want to buy frozen seafood. Frozen seafood that's frozen on shore or on the ship is the highest quality. The fish is cryogenically frozen within hours of catching it. It's had no time to build up harmful bacteria. It gets frozen. In fact, some people say, "Oh, Marcus, I don't eat frozen fish. I don't like frozen fish." Then I ask them, "Well, have you had sushi before?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, I love sushi." Folks, sushi, even in certain states, in some states, you're not allowed to serve any non-frozen fish. Certain states have laws set up, including Japan is well known for serving thawed frozen fish in their sushi, okay? When you freeze it, you're going to kill a lot of microbes. You create a safer product by freezing it. So a lot of people think, well, I don't eat frozen seafood. And actually, you have eaten a lot of frozen seafood in the past, and you cannot tell the difference with the way technology is these days. If you take a piece of fish home from the store and you keep it in your refrigerator and you haven't eaten it 4 or 5 days later, and you say, I'm going to throw this into the freezer, that is poorly frozen fish. Your home freezer keeps it 0 degrees. It typically does not have fans blowing on it. When you take a piece of fish and put it into your home freezer, first of all, your home freezer is not designed to freeze items. It's designed to keep things frozen. A freezer that's designed to freeze actually is set at a much, much cooler temperature, -30, -40, -50. And there's high velocity fans in there that are going to go in and flash freeze things. So your freezer at home is not designed to freeze. It's only designed to put frozen food into it. That makes sense. If anybody's watching and that makes sense, just drop a comment and say, yes, that makes sense. So when you take a piece of fish that's home, that's never been frozen or that's fresh, and you stick it into your freezer, it's this very slow, drawn-out process of freezing, which then causes the cells, the molecules to split and leak liquid. Okay. And then when you thaw it out and you go to cook it, you have this rubbery, dry piece of fish. And you're like, I don't like frozen seafood. This is why. Folks, the stuff that we buy in the restaurant, the stuff you can go into ShopRite and buy in the frozen section, that stuff is properly frozen. It is, sometimes it's glazed, sometimes there's a salt solution with it. Read labels. Be very, very careful with reading labels. When I go to some of the supply houses, some of the cash and carry places, I go in and I read the labels, because it's shocking to see sometimes all the fillers that they're putting into frozen seafood. It'll say on there, for example, I take pictures sometimes because I love, not that I laugh, but I'm like, of course, this is too good to be true, because it'll say wild Alaskan pollock, product of China, because it's caught in Alaska, then shipped to China and packaged in China. It'll say packaged in China, and then it says, Alaskan pollock, and then it says water, sodium this, sodium that, and it has all the fillers in it. And I've seen this stuff cooked before. When you cook sole or when you cook frozen stuff like that, it actually starts shrinking up, and all this water, this liquid comes off of it. I did something 2 weeks ago where I took chicken breast and did it as an experiment, cryovac it, cooked it, and you saw all this liquid come off the bag. And I showed that here on Facebook Live. And it was like, oh, wow, there's like 3 cups of liquid coming off of 2 chicken breasts. Same thing can happen with seafood. So just because something says wild Alaskan doesn't mean that it's packaged in Alaska. It doesn't mean it's a pure product. Now, if you're truly interested in buying fish that's not farm raised, you always want to look to Alaska. Alaska, in their state constitution, does not allow farmed fish. That is the one thing that they were very proactive on, very, very from the very beginning, the last 70, 80 years since they've been an official state in the U.S., whenever they came on board. Their state constitution was strictly no farmed fish, no fish farms, no aquaculture. Everything they catch in Alaska is truly wild. They have very sustainable counts. They do quota systems, they monitor it, they make sure that they can replenish the stocks that they're taking. When you go through the Bering Sea and you head over into Russia, you're going to find the same exact king crab, the same species, but you're going to find a much different population scenario, because the Russians decimate the population. They're not into the quota system and sustainable management like Alaska is. So what happens is they totally just decimate the population out there. And that's why if you price compare king crab from Russia, king crab from the US, the US king crab is almost twice the price. So you're talking something like $15, something that's $30 a pound, literally twice the price. So when you see the stuff on sale in Walmart or ShopRite or Hannaford's, I can almost guarantee you that you're buying a Russian product, Russian caught, Russian packaged, or Russian caught and Chinese packaged, packaged in China. It is so inexpensive, even from the East Coast. Like a lot of the East Coast producers of calamari, the catchers, the people that are out there, the boats, the facilities, they actually ship calamari to China across the country, or through however they do, through the Panama Canal, or however they ship it. They freeze it, they ship it, it gets processed in China, gets packaged and sent back to the US. To make that round trip, including labor and shipping, is only 20 cents a pound. To pay a US employee in somewhere like Point Judith is going to run $20 an hour plus, as opposed to sending something in China for 55 cents an hour. And it's literally 20 cents a pound to ship it round trip. So again, even though seafood's caught in an area, you have to make sure that the seafood is packaged also in that area, because they do cut corners. They send it to facilities that are not regulated by our strict standards. And when seafood comes into the country, less than 2% of it is actually inspected. So sometimes things will go packaged that aren't. Seafood fraud is extremely common. I know I'm getting on a lot of different topics here. I didn't mean to do this, because the main topic here is when you see the word Atlantic salmon, it is farm raised. It is farm raised. It's typically farm raised in the ocean in net pens and called open net pens. So Some producers will now start putting the word sustainable, like Faroe Islands loves to use the word sustainable. You will see on menus, because chefs will buy the frozen boxes of Faroe Island salmon that say certified sustainable in their own logo with their own definition of what sustainable is, with zero bearing on the true definition of sustainability. They are feeding them a tremendous amount of wild caught fish. It creates a protein deficit in the ocean. They are feeding it a lot of synthetic antioxidants. They are feeding it pesticides in the food. The fish are living on top of each other. They're living in dirty water. They're polluting the ocean. No matter how you look at it, open pen aquaculture, open pen farm salmon is a detriment to the environment and to your health. So when you see the word sustainable when it comes to Faroe Island, totally false. It is their own definition. The company, the Faroe Islands, the consortium there, whoever they are, they're totally making that up about the word sustainability. They might be doing something a little better than other salmon farms, but still, folks, there's no wrong way to do the right thing, as Alexandra Morton says, a marine biologist out of British Columbia. There's no right way to do the wrong thing. You're putting salmon in a pen. You're putting 100,000 of them in there together. You're getting high mortality rates. And again, I love to use this analogy. If you were to drive by a beef farm, a feedlot of beef, and you saw half the cattle lying there dead, just dying there, rotting, their corpses dying there, rotting, you would never eat beef again. You'd be like, there's no way I'm eating feedlot beef. Salmon that's the equivalent of salmon. Salmon, that's what happens to salmon, except not only does half the salmon die, sometimes the whole farm gets lost. So you'll have 30,000 fish in this pen, 30,000 fish in that pen, and you'll have pen after pen that just the whole thing, the mortality rate, everything's killed, but it's under the water. So you can't drive by and see what's happening. So they hide that from us. But if you saw that in the beef industry, you'd never eat that beef again. This is what's happening in the salmon industry. If you Google right now, if you did once a month, the first of every month, and Googled news for farmed salmon mortality, you would find a story from the previous month, literally 12 months a year, of salmon that are getting very sick from viruses, overcrowding, algae blooms. You'll be finding salmon in certain parts of the world that have die-off, that have high mortality rates, where they have to either put the whole farm in salmon, have to kill every salmon that's on there, or all the salmon's dying to begin with. You will find that month after month after month after month after month after month. It is not a rare occurrence. It is a very common occurrence. And when I speak to friends in the salmon, where salmon comes from in Canada, I speak to Bill Bryden a lot. He's a conservationist up there. I speak to Alexandra Morton on the West Coast. These salmon farms, one of the reasons why they like to be tucked away off the beaten path is so that people can't be nosy and people can't stick cameras under the water and people can't see what's really going on in these salmon farms. So when you have mass mortality like that, it kind of gets pushed off to the wayside, but it's happening and it's there. And there was a great documentary done a couple years ago where they went to next to the processing plant of one of the salmons in British Columbia. And folks, when you start processing salmon, that's when everything starts getting mixed in. You start processing and the water goes back into the ocean and everything just gets back into the salmon. Everything gets infected. Everything across the board just gets infected. The water gets infected. The fish get infected. The flesh gets infected. Everything. In fact, Alexandra Morton has actually gone into grocery stores in British Columbia that have local wild salmon. I'm sorry, local farm salmon from British Columbia on the shelf saying this is local, this is sustainable, this is farm salmon from our community. She's taken it off the shelf, purchased it, sent this flesh in, and it's all showed up positive, lots of positive results for fish anemia, for all these toxicities and all these viruses right there that you can buy right on the shelf. It is shocking what you will find in those products. So folks, the word Atlantic salmon, I didn't mean to get off on a tangent. It is Friday night. I have to go jump in the kitchen and do some cooking. But Atlantic salmon is always farmed salmon. Never, ever, ever take a chance. Never believe a chef. Never believe a fishmonger when they say that their Atlantic salmon is wild. Proceed with extreme caution. All right, folks, have a great weekend, a great night, and thank you for tuning in. I appreciate all the comments on Instagram, lots of viewers on Instagram and Facebook, and of course this content also gets spread to YouTube as well. So wherever you saw this, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you later.